Today's the debate of Mike Pence and Kamala Harris, and we frankly need to know what we have to expect. We do have the debate record on both respects with both candidates, and we got to look at some of the debate history of at least Mike Pence. As you can see, Mike Pence beat Tim Kaine 48% to 42% in the Communist News Network instant poll. Just kidding, but still, meaning that he has a pretty good record in debate history. So we're going to check this out. We're going to look at the highlights of Pence and Tim Kaine on race relations and law enforcement, which will probably be relevant in this elections debate too. So subscribe.
After the Dallas police shooting, Police Chief David Brown said, quote, "We're asking cops to do too much in this country. Every societal failure, we put it off on the cops to solve. Not enough mental health funding, not enough drug addiction funding. Schools fail. Let's give it to the cops." Do we ask too much of police officers in this country? And how would you specifically address the chief's concerns, Senator Kaine?
Elaine, I think that's a very fair comment. I think we put a lot on police shoulders. And this is something I got a lot of scar tissue and experience on. I was a city councilman and mayor in Richmond. And when I came in, we had one of the highest homicide rates in the United States. We fought very, very hard over the course of my time in local office with our police department, and we reduced our homicide rate nearly in half. And then when I was governor of Virginia, we worked hard too. And we did something we had really wanted to do. For the first time ever, we cracked the top 10 safest states because we worked together. Here's what I learned as a mayor and a governor. The way you make communities safer and the way you make police safer is through community policing. You build the bonds between the community and the police force, build bonds of understanding, and then when people feel comfortable in their communities, that gap between the police and the communities they serve narrows. And when that gap narrows, it's safe for the communities and it's safer for the police. That model still works across our country, but there are some other models that don't work. An overly aggressive, more militarized model. Donald Trump recently said we need to do more stop and frisk around the country. That would be a big mistake because it polarizes the relationship between the police and the community. So here's what we'll do. We'll focus on community policing. We will focus on, and Hillary Clinton has rolled out a really comprehensive mental health reform package that she worked on with law enforcement professionals. And we will also fight the scourge of gun violence in the United States. I'm a gun owner. I'm a strong Second Amendment supporter. But I got a lot of scar tissue because when I was governor of Virginia, there was a horrible shooting at Virginia Tech. And we learned that through that painful situation, that gaps in the background record check system should have been closed and it could have prevented that crime. And so we're going to work to do things like close background record checks. And if we do, we won't have the tragedies that we did. One of those killed at Virginia Tech was a guy named Liviu Negrescu. He was a 70-plus-year-old Romanian Holocaust survivor. He'd survived the Holocaust. Then he survived the Soviet Union takeover of his country. But then he was a visiting professor at Virginia Tech, and he couldn't survive the scourge of gun violence. We can support the Second Amendment and do things like background record checks and make us safer, and that'll make police safer too.
Governor Pence.
Okay, so as you can see, as of right now, you can obviously see the tone difference between 2016 and 20. It's kind of weird how the Democrats go even further left just within 3 to 5 years. And again, Tim Kaine here says he supports the police. There's no rhetoric about defunding the police in any way. In fact, they want to increase funding. And yet, a lot of the far left, including Kamala, are more or less on the defend the rioters, the protesters, the defunding the police, sequester them, etc., etc. So this Democrat approach of I've lowered homicide, we have more cops, stuff like that, but also be careful around the edges of the militarization of the police, stop and frisk, which is an acceptable position to have, by the way. That's a moderate position, but then you look at the far left, and Kamala's going to be even more crazy than whatever Tim Kaine just said, by the way. So it'll make Mike Pence look more sane because he hasn't really changed on the issue of law enforcement, thank God. And we're going to see how he assesses this statement by Kaine, and we'll see kind of how he would respond hypothetically to Kamala. So.
You know, my uncle was a cop, a career cop, on the beat in downtown Chicago. He was my hero when I was growing up. When we go up to visit my dad's family in Chicago, my 3 brothers and I would marvel at my uncle when he would come out in his uniform, sidearm at his side. Police officers are the best of us. mean, men and women, white, African American, Asian, Latino, Hispanic, they put their lives on the line every single day. And let me say, at the risk of agreeing with you, community policing is a great idea. It's worked in the Hoosier State, and we fully support that. Donald Trump and I are going to make sure that law enforcement have the resources and the tools to be able to really restore law and order to the cities and communities of this nation. It's probably why the 330,000 members of the Fraternal Order of Police endorsed Donald Trump as the next president of the United States of America, because they see his commitment to them. They see his commitment to law and order. But they also hear the bad-mouthing that comes from people that seize upon tragedy in the wake of police action shootings as a reason to use a broad brush to accuse law enforcement of implicit bias or institutional racism. And that really has got to stop. I mean, when an African-American police officer in Charlotte named Brentley Vinson, an all-star football player who went to Liberty University here in the state, came home, followed his dad into law enforcement, joined the force in Charlotte in 2014, was involved in a police action shooting that claimed the life of Keith Lamont Scott. It was a tragedy. I mean, we mourn with those who mourn. We grieve with those who grieve. We're saddened at the loss of life. But Hillary Clinton actually referred to that moment as an example of implicit bias in the police force, where she used, when she was asked in the debate a week ago whether there was implicit bias in law enforcement, her only answer was that there's implicit bias in everyone in the United States. I just think what we ought to do is we ought to stop seizing on these moments of tragedy. We ought to assure the public that we'll have a full and complete and transparent investigation whenever there's a loss of life because of police action. But Senator, please, enough of this seeking every opportunity to demean law enforcement broadly by making the accusation of implicit bias every time tragedy occurs.
Elaine, people shouldn't be afraid to bring up issues of bias in law enforcement. And if you're afraid to have if you're afraid to have the discussion, you'll never solve it. And so here's an example, heartbreaking. We would agree this is a heartbreaking example. The guy Philando Castile, who was killed in St. Paul, who was a worker, a valued worker in a local school, and he was killed for no apparent reason in an incident that will be discussed and will be investigated. But when folks went and explored this situation, what they found is that Philando Castile, who was they called him Mr. Rogers with dreadlocks in the school that he worked. The kids loved him. That he had been stopped by police 40 or 50 times before that fatal incident. And if you look at sentencing in this country, African Americans and Latinos get sentenced for the same crimes at very different rates.
We need criminal justice reform. Indiana has passed criminal justice
But I just want to say, those who say we should not be able to bring up and talk about bias in the system will never solve the problem.
When an African American police officer is involved in a police action shooting involving an African American, why would Hillary Clinton accuse that African American police officer of implicit bias?
I guess I can't believe you are defending the position that there is no bias and it's a topic.
Governor Pence, I have a question on that point.
I did not make that statement.
Your fellow Republican, Governor Pence, Senator Tim Scott, who is African American, recently spoke on the Senate floor. He said he was stopped 7 times by law enforcement in 1 year.
A U.S.
He
Senator.
said, I have felt the anger, the frustration, the sadness, and the humiliation that comes with feeling like you're being targeted for nothing more than being just yourself. What would you say to Senator Scott about his experiences?
Well, I have the deepest respect for Senator Scott, and he's a close friend. And what I would say is that we need to adopt criminal justice reform nationally. I signed criminal justice reform in the state of Indiana, Senator, and we're very proud of it. I worked when I was in Congress on the Second Chance Act. We have got to do a better job recognizing and correcting the errors in the system that do reflect institutional bias in criminal justice. But what Donald Trump and I are saying is, let's not have the reflex of assuming the worst of men and women in law enforcement. We truly do believe that Law enforcement is not a
Elaine,
force for
can I-
racism
So what
or
would you say
division
to
in our
Senator
country.
Scott, Governor?
Law enforcement in this country is a force for good. They truly are people that put their lives on the line every single day. But I would suggest to you, what we need to do is assert a stronger leadership at the national level to support law enforcement. You just heard Senator Kaine reject a stop and frisk. Well, I would suggest to you that the families that live in our inner cities that are besieged by crime.
Elaine, let
Governor,
me,
the question is about
let-
Senator
yeah,
Scott. What would you tell
and
Senator
Elaine,
Scott?
if I could jump, but I've heard Senator Scott make that eloquent plea, and look, criminal justice is about respecting the law and being respected by the law. So there is a fundamental respect issue here. And I just want to talk about the tone that's set from the top. Donald Trump during his campaign has called Mexicans rapists and criminals. He's called women slobs, pigs, dogs, disgusting. I don't like saying that in front of my wife and my mother. He attacked an Indiana-born federal judge and said he was unqualified to hear a federal lawsuit because his parents were Mexican. He went after John McCain, a POW, and said he wasn't a hero because he'd been captured. He said African Americans are living in hell, and he perpetrated this outrageous and bigoted lie that President Obama is not a U.S. citizen. If you want to have a society where people are respected and respect laws, you can't have somebody at the top who demeans every group that he talks about. And I cannot believe that Governor Pence will defend the insult-driven campaign that Donald Trump has run.
All right, guys, so that is the highlight that we're going to be looking over. Let me just mute this and let this play in the background as I talk about this. Pretty interesting how Kaine keeps on trying to be self-righteous and trying to put himself in the high stool, basically, to be the presumptive pious guy compared to Mike. And the good thing about Mike Pence, even under pressure, is that he does not show emotion, which is very intelligent. When you have Kamala Harris tonight talking about, sexism, bigot Trump, orange man bad, we're going to have electric fence Pence completely quiet, smirking a little bit. Chill. He is going to be cool as an ice cube. He is going to be under control, I believe, personally. Now, I think this is very important to have in a vice presidential candidate for him to be more or less quiet, to be completely informed and adequately able to debate, but also not be super spontaneous, especially when you have a person such as Donald Trump on the top of the ticket to begin with. And also, again, you can see that he's very logical, putting down all disagreement. He's able to argue every point so far, and he's able to not come off supposedly as racist as Donald Trump, to not be as crazy as Donald Trump. So there's no real way. Now, what Kamala will try to do is to say, well, Biden's reasonable and Trump is crazy, and you support Donald Trump, Mike Pence. And then Mike Pence will be quiet, he'll be calm, and he will be able to logically take her down, and there's nothing she can do about it. She'll just look crazy. Anyways, guys, this is what I think will happen. He will win the debate, I believe. I'm going to think that he's going to do a 6 out of 10. She'll do a 4 out of 10. I'm being conservative. I hope he does a 7 and she does a 3. But, who knows what could happen. Now, what I do have to say is that the vice presidential debate does matter. Again, we are looking at potentially the 2024 nominees for the presidency. I mean, this could really happen. Mike Pence could be the nominee for the Republicans later on, as could Kamala Harris for the Democrats. Sleepy Joe comes in, he could get replaced within the year's end. So that's a very important prospect. And again, hopefully Mike Pence brings up, are you for court packing? You're the furthest left senator. Will you denounce Antifa? Stuff like that. We'll have to watch. But anyways, guys, I am pretty optimistic about Mike Pence's chances. Thank you for watching and subscribe. Alrighty, come on. Okay, goodbye.